Um, so we're supposed to have this community meeting last week, but we rescheduled it to this week because there was KubeCon last week. But the timing also works out great for us because, as many of you probably already seen, we updated the steering committee charter. And as part of that charter, a few extra seats opened up, and we're holding elections for it. So the first thing we wanted to cover in this call is an overview of the charter, and what are the new seats, what are the type of seats the new charter establishes, and then the elections. Talk a little bit about the candidates and the voting process of the election. So first thing we'll talk about is the steering committee, the current responsibilities of the steering committee. How's it different from TOC? Dan, you want to say a few things about the difference?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'll start with the duties of the TOC and the steering committee. The steering committee is first of all, the TOC is the committee that is, as this says, composed of individuals. Those seats aren't granted to companies; those are granted to people, and they are people who have shown leadership in the project. So we have a technical kind of path that you can go from progressing from being a contributor to a working group lead, and then eventually, TOC. Right now, I think we have 4 different companies represented on the TOC, although each of those individuals has earned the seat on the TOC by showing technical leadership in the project. And I think that's important to understand. If there is an issue that cannot be resolved in a working group, the TOC would make the kind of call on how to resolve that issue. And the TOC sets technical direction for the project. The steering committee is in charge of the administrative aspects of the project, is also in charge of communications and I will say marketing. I'll put finger quotes around that because we really don't do much real marketing, but there's really administrative and marketing guidance for the project. So how do we speak publicly? We do write the kind of orders of the bylaws, if you will. And in the steering committee, as you'll see, as Craig and as Ram go over it, we have always had seats for companies, and in doing that, we want to encourage companies to invest in the project. So on the technical side, we are rewarding individuals who are dedicating time to the project and showing leadership in the project. And in the steering committee, our attempt is to reward companies for dedicating resources to the project. And that's, the steering committee, as you'll see, is a combination of different seats, but some of the seats on the steering committee will be granted to the companies who are essentially spending a lot of money on the project in the form of employee time. Okay, so there you go.
Yep. Thanks. And you have a pretty good tweet or a thread around this topics as well. So that's why
I wanted to kind of explain why we went that way.
Right. So, I mean, as Dan said, the steering focuses on governance aspects. So they're responsible for the bylaws of the steering committee as well as the technical oversight committee. They're responsible for the community itself. So like the developers, the contributors, the vendors. They're also responsible for the community tools such as Slack, Discuss, running meetups when we had them, the blog, etc. Trademark issues. So the OUC owns the Istio trademark. So if there's any issues with that, the steering committee is responsible for advising the OUC. Marketing and advocacy, as Dan covered. And then they also control the resources that it takes to run the Istio project. So things like the infrastructure and the istio.io website. So this leaves the TOC to kind of just focus all their efforts on the technical direction of the product, the roadmaps, the releases, and what goes into each release, etc. So the current steering committee is made up of 10 seats. 6 of them are from Google, and then 4 from IBM and Red Hat. And this has been this way for a while, since the early days of Istio. Not now, as the project has grown to having so many different like contributors, companies, vendors participating in it. We wanted to update the charter to reflect this diversity. So as we said, it takes a lot for Istio to be successful. Not just developers and contributors, but also there's advocates, marketing dollars, writers, etc. So, and there's many companies that make this investment. So the new charter is created so that we reflect as much of that as possible and give voice to as many of those contributors and companies as possible. A couple of the other goals of the charter is that no single company, regardless of how much they contribute in terms of percentage, has the ability to single-handedly win a vote or single-handedly veto a decision, without other people from the community. There are 13 total seats. These are going to be made up of contribution seats and community seats. You can read the charter using the link below, and we'll put the charter in the Google Docs notes as well. There's also a blog post about it. I'll pause, see if anybody has any comments. The contribution seats. So this makes up 9 out of the 13 total seats. And the point of these contribution seats is to give voice or give seats to companies that make the most measurable contributions, right? There are multiple ways to measure a company contribution. And for this term, we've decided that just going by the pull request from a company for the last 12 months would be a good starting point. Now, the next term, we can reevaluate this metric and this formula, but that's where we've kind of started right now.
And can I say something about that
sure.
before you move on?
Mm-hmm.
As Ron said, this year we used merged pull requests as a metric. The charter says that every year the steering committee will choose a metric, and it may stay with merged pull requests. There was some concern that metrics could be gamed, and so we decided to not kind of formalize in the charter what the metric would be, because if we feel like anyone is gaming, I don't think it's very likely, frankly. We think this is pretty good. We looked at much more complicated formulas, none of which seemed to add value or turn into would have resulted in anything different. Mm-hmm. So we are reserving the right to, in the future, ensure that we're finding a metric that kind of accurately seems to gauge contribution. We're really gaming this in order to inflate themselves. We might look at something else, but as far as I know, we'll stay. I hope that we can just stay with this because it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it really does seem to gauge who is contributing and how much.
Yep. A couple of key points that I forgot to mention. We've enforced a minimum of 3 companies so that we're pushing diversity into these contribution seats. This also involves a cap of 5 total contribution seats that are allowed per company. So regardless of what their percentage contribution would be with like merge pull request, they would be capped at 5. And then the remaining seats can go down to the next set of companies. So this, with the current formula, would equal out to be 5 from Google, 3 from IBM and Red Hat, and then Salesforce now gets a seat. Any more comments on contribution seats? Dan, Craig?
Yeah, two little things that I'll add there. It's a minimum of 3 companies. We deliberately did not make that a maximum. So in the event that there are a lot more contributions from other companies, you could imagine 9 different companies each getting 1 seat each if the numbers added up that way. And we're not only talking about merged pull requests in terms of code. This is not just on the Istio repository. It includes the IO website, documentation, it includes the community repository. Most of the work of the project is done on GitHub. And so we're happy that that reflects as best as we can contributions to areas outside of code.
Yep. Okay. So moving on to community seats. So 4 out of the 13 total are community seats. There are contributors to Istio or there's contributions to Istio that are not just pull requests to the source code or to the documentation. There's large and small companies that contribute to Istio in other ways. This could be from like leadership, whether they're reviewing design documents, whether they're talking about Istio, they're community leaders, they're talking about Istio in conferences, etc. And we wanted to give voice to these individuals, as large and small companies as well. So the 4 seats that are the community seats are to be voted by the Istio community in an election. And that's the election that we're going to talk about next. Any comments, Dan, Craig?
I don't think we explicitly say it might come up in the elections, but there's a we should actually check and see if it is going to come up. You cannot have a community seat if you're employed by a company that has a contribution seat. So Googlers and people from IBM, Red Hat, and Salesforce aren't eligible for this. And there is a maximum of 1 community seat per organization. So there are 4 seats. There will be 4 different organizations represented here.
Right. So there would be 5 additional companies that would get added to the steering committee as part of this charter compared to before. Great. So that's this election. The point of these elections is to appoint those 4 seats, those 4 community members to the steering committee. Craig from Google, who was just talking, and I, Ram, are the election officers. We're just there to kind of help this election process. Craig's doing most of the work. I'm just tagging along.
Ram says that I'm going on vacation for a week, so it's all on him.
Oh God, I did not know that.
It's an easy week, you'll see.
Good. The candidacy process. Who are the eligible candidates? Any project member who, as Craig said, doesn't work for a company that already has a contribution seat. So Google, IBM, Red Hat, and Salesforce would not be eligible. Could be a candidate. So, and if you are interested in running for the steering committee, you can nominate yourself by creating an issue on the Istio/community GitHub repo. You can also nominate others that you think would make good candidates. The nominees, if they accept your nomination or if they accept their own nomination, they will submit a pull request with a short, like 300-word biography into the same like Istio community. You'll see in elections in the 2020 folder where you'll see a list of all the names and they'll submit their bio in Markdown format. So you can go see what are all the candidates. The voting process, who's eligible to vote? Any project member who's submitted a pull request in the last 12 months gets automatically added to the eligibility list. You could have contributed to Istio in other ways. That's not a pull request. So if you feel like that's the case with you, there's this voting exception form that you can fill out, and then that gets submitted to the steering committee and we'll review it and then see if you have a stand in the community so that you can vote. You should receive an email address that we already have on file with instructions on how to vote. The method, we're using the CIVS tool to conduct these the election. As a voter, you'll have the option to choose multiple candidates in order of preference. So you're not just voting for one candidate. You can choose the order. And then the tool will help us identify the top 4 candidates. And we're going to be picking the top 4 candidates from unique companies. So these candidates will come from 4 different companies. So you can't have 2 candidates from the same company. Anything I missed? The schedule, the candidates will submit their bios, and if you're a voter and if you want to, the voting exception forms, if you want to vote, they're all due by September 6th. The exact time is documented in that markdown file that I have linked on the bottom. September 14th is when the election begins using email ballots. September 27th is when the election closes, and then the week of September 29th, we'll process everything and then announce the winners. Any questions? Well, easy enough. So keep a lookout for that email.
Anyone on the call interested in standing?
Well, if you're shy, you can always open up that nomination issue.
We've had 2 nominations
Yes,
so far, and there's a week and a half remaining to go.
I am not. I don't recognize the names of many of the partners that I expect to be interested. Yeah, I will say a little bit behind the philosophy here of the community seats, since I did talk about the contribution seats. The contribution seats are, as I said, exist to ensure that the companies who are really putting their money in terms of employee time, making sure they get represented. The goal with those community seats is to make sure that our partner community, many of whom are adding value, not always in the form of lots of PRs to the source code itself, but are adding value to the ecosystem, adding value to the community. We want to make sure that they have a say in how the project communicates, and a voice. We do feel like there are a bunch of things that differentiate Istio from other service meshes out there technically, but there are also lots of good things about the project. As much as we try to stay out of Twitter flame wars, I think that as a result of that, there's a lot of miscommunication about the project. That by far the most diverse set of contributors, a much larger set, whether you look at just raw numbers of people or you look at the number of companies contributing. We also have the most integrations and companies that have chosen to either use Istio to build a product, or build a product that integrates with, or build a product on top of Istio. And it's those companies who we want to make sure are represented as well. And that's why the community seats really exist, is to ensure that even if they're not in the top 3 contributors to source code, they still can help us shape how the project is viewed in the community. And then finally, with a company like Salesforce, it's great because they're neither of those. There's just a user, but they have a real just a user, but they have a real vested interest in ensuring that it's a healthy ecosystem as a big user. So we're really trying to make sure that all of these diverse groups get represented on the steering committee and can help shape how we run the project and communicate about the project.
Cool. I mean, if you have any questions, feel free to check out the steering committee, the new steering committee charter. There's a similar documentation that we added for the elections. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us by either emailing us at steering@discuss.io, or on the Slack, there's TOC Steering Questions channel. So ask us any question over there. The next item on the agenda is the release of Istio 1.7, which I believe went out last Friday. You can read the announcement blog. A couple of the highlight features that stood out for me is VM integration. Istio has had mesh expansion to VMs for a few releases now, but in 1.7 it's greatly improved from a security perspective. There's a new workload API that treats VMs as like Kubernetes pods, so you can control it using APIs. The security improvements have to do with the identity of the VM workloads. So generation of a short-lived like Kubernetes token for the VM workload, and automatic cert rotation to the VM workload. A few more things. The operator's canary control plane updates has been improved. On the last community call, Steve showed a quick demo of this. So if you're upgrading Istio, you can do like canary rollouts where you test out a new control plane and go back, or you can do like A/B versions where you deploy a new control plane and then slowly migrate traffic to the new control plane and then remove the old one. There's now also an Istio-ctl uninstall command. There's central Istio-D work has started coming out, so it's in alpha. Central Istio-D is also being renamed to external control plane, where you run Istio-D outside of the cluster where your workload is. So the mesh would be in your workload cluster, but just Istio-D itself would be running outside of that cluster. So you could run in a VM or a different cluster, or somebody else can manage Istio-D for you. There's a new flag for delaying your application start until Envoy, until Sidecar is started. So if you've noticed issues where your application starts up really fast before Envoy starts up, you might have noticed that it's not able to communicate like outbound until the Sidecar was ready. So this flag will delay your application start. And a couple more things. So this talks about running the gateway as non-root. I believe we also run Istio-D as non-root by default now in 1.7. Now that the gateway is running as non-root, if you had any custom ports that you were exposing from the gateway, so not the target port pointing to your application, but if you're exposing ports on the gateway service itself, I believe if you're starting to see some problems, keep an eye out that this might be due to something related to non-root. But for majority of the cases, this shouldn't have any effect on you. And then last but not least, Istio's moved to Envoy XDS v3 API. Again, that should not have any impact on any user-facing impact. So it should not have any impact on your workload, but we're hoping this means significantly better performance of the control plane, performance and scale. There's the announcement, and as always, there's also change notes where you can see more detail about what went into this release. Noticed a lot of external content, Solo, IBM, Banzai Cloud, and there's a YouTube video as well that covers what's new in 1.7. A couple of these have a video that talks about some of the VM expansion and the control plane upgrade process. So definitely check out some of these blogs. So that covers everything on the agenda. Any questions?
Seems like not.
Great. We'll give everybody 30 minutes back. Looking forward.
Are we? I know this. We did this as an off-week meeting. Do you know, is the meeting next week or is it 2 weeks hence?
Well, right now it's scheduled for next week.
Okay.
I think we haven't decided if that should be pushed. Maybe I'll keep the next week meeting.
Yeah,
I'll
if we
go
do,
back to
we
the
might.
schedule.
And you two might. Well, maybe Craig's on vacation, but maybe you should be prepared to do a reprise if there are people who kind of counted on the every other week and yeah, are interested.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's my guess. Okay, well, thanks for putting that together. That was a good informative. Are those slides in Istio community?
They are on Istio Drive.
Somewhere. Okay.
Yeah. So
great. Yeah, we should have Istio tweet out perhaps a link. It's a good explainer for what's going on.
Cool. Yep, I will get that.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.